everyone. My name is Michael Dickens. I'm the Gallery Director and Chief Curator at the New Gallery at the Austin Peay State University. Tonight's event is brought to you by the New Gallery, Austin Peay State University's Department of Art and Design, and CECA, the Center of Excellence for the Creative Arts. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Uchee, Shawnee, and First Nations on which we are learning, organizing, celebrating, and broadcasting today. I know many of you are tuning in from around the state, as well as from many outside of Tennessee, so thank you all for joining us. The CECA Tennessee Artist Fellowship was created several years ago to celebrate contemporary art and to support the continued creative work for exceptional Tennessee artists. Since Austin Peay State University is the center of excellence for the creative arts for the entire state of Tennessee, we wanted to find a way to support artists statewide. You can learn all about the Center of Excellence for the Creative Arts. I'll put some links in the tab in the chat bar here in just a second. So bear with me on that one. So there's an incredible number of amazing artists in Tennessee, but we can agree that there isn't much financial support for them as we would like. It is our hope that this fellowship will help a Tennessee artist maintain their practice and to know that they are noticed and that we support what they're doing. Unlike other fellowships, nominations and applications from artists are not solicited. A committee of Austin Peay APSU faculty compiles a list of outstanding artists from across the state, and after several discussions, debates, arguments, and maybe a little high fives, we select the fellowship recipient. Through CECA's generous support, the selected artist receives $5,000 in unrestricted funds to aid in the creation of new work, by far my favorite phone call to make each year, and an additional $2,000 to present an artist lecture. This year, we were able to award 2 fellowships, one to Karen Seapker, who you see now, from Nashville, and one to Benji Russell from Dowtown. So we're here tonight to publicly acknowledge the first of this year's recipients, Karen Seapker. Tonight's talk will be followed with some time for Q&A, while I'll be acting as moderator. So please feel free to submit a question at any time during the talk using the Q&A function below. The chat will be turned off. All right. So Karen Seapker's paintings have been featured at museums and galleries in the US and internationally. She's received her MFA from Hunter College in New York. Her work was recently included in State of the Art 2020, Crystal Bridges Museum Survey of Contemporary Art. Her work is in various private and public collections, and reviews of her work have been in publications including Burnaway, Hyperallergic, and Art Forum. She lives and works in Nashville, Tennessee. So a member of the selection committee for the fellowship states, it's interesting to see an artist's work change when they have children. From content to materials to time management, having children will influence how an artist thinks and how an artist produces. Seapker is an artist whose large, colorful, semi-abstract paintings seek to tackle the question of what it means to be a mother. She questions the idea of maternal ephemerality, the need to comfort, and the need to be comforted. The way she forces the viewer's eye to dance around her work also reminds us of the rhythmic repetitions of daily schedules of children that turn into ritualistic endeavors consistently broken by the unpredictability of what children bring to the table. The unpredictability seems chaotic, but it's full of welcoming surprises. And as Seapker herself states, an existence that reveals that consistency is a mirage. So the day before, and she might talk about this in her talk, but the day before she was to deliver paintings to the Zeitgeist Gallery in Nashville for an upcoming solo exhibition, Seapker's East Nashville studio was destroyed by the tornado that ripped through town on March 2nd, so just over a year ago. The works in the studio thankfully survived, but the studio did not. So Seapker used the opening of the exhibition as a call to other artists in the Nashville community to donate works for $100. With 100% of the proceeds going directly to Gideon's Army, which is working with the people of North Nashville on the tornado relief effort. This call garnered works from 67 artists that raised over $10,000 for the Nashville community. The committee continues. So her work alone is worthy of any recognition that she receives, but it was her selflessness to use the spotlight of her solo exhibition and her resolve to organize the Nashville arts community in raising money to help other hard-hit neighborhoods and really what made her stand out this year. So please welcome the 2020-21 CECA Tennessee Artist Fellow, Karen Seapker. Everyone's quiet.
Michael, thank you so much. And thank you to CECA, the Center of Excellence for the Creative Arts from Austin Peay. I think this award would be meaningful anytime, but especially right now. It has really meant a lot. And it's also such an honor to share it with Benji Russell, who's an artist whose person and whose work I just adore. So thank you. It's also really nice to talk to Austin Peay because I had the great opportunity to teach at Austin Peay for a number of semesters. And I just love the student body there and the community there. So I have an opportunity today to talk about my work, and let me share my screen here. And what I'm going to be talking about is I'm going to talk about the development of, I'm going to kind of go way back and then eventually bring you towards more recent work. But what I want to start talking about is the kind of vocabulary that I have developed over time as a painter. Because there's a number of different types of brushwork that I have come to reference over the years and have come to consider certain brushwork kind of existing in a way with different kinds of meaning. But while I want to describe that vocabulary, I also really want to honor the way that I consider painting to be this really special place where we can come to it and suspend that desire to quickly name, codify, bring easy judgments. But instead, the thing that I really love about painting is that I find this sense of footing between painting's ability to suggest meaning and to suspend meaning. And that is a place of engagement and connection that I feel where I can learn the most, where I can be in a sense of wonder. And it's a very important place for me. It's a very important condition for me to be able to exist within. And I also, before I begin, just want to say that integral to my relationship with painting is that I made all these paintings, but I'm also these paintings' viewer. And I say that because I consider myself a viewer of these paintings, both when they're finished, but also in process. And I say that because that allows me to see them as something outside of myself, to give them a certain type of autonomy and freedom so that things can occur and happen outside of myself that probably even could be more interesting than something that I might control. And that's a relationship I really relish with the painting. So what we're looking at right now is actually, it's an old painting called The Viewing. And this little painting was shown alongside a number of large scale works at my thesis exhibition from Hunter, all of which were large scale paintings. And I had this idea, people may come in and see these large scale works that were full of color and expressive marks, and they were just retinal and maybe generous, and people could maybe easily dismiss those dismiss those paintings for those reasons. But I thought that this would be a reminder for people to realize that they were viewers in a space in front of these paintings that connoted a sense of passage or the passage of time. And the passage of time is something that is a subject that I continue to think about today, and in something that I think about in painting. And I started painting about the passage of time back in 2007, and it was not a subject that I chose. After an unexpected death in my family, I simply couldn't paint the things that I had been working on in my studio anymore, and I made an immediate break from that work. And instead, I started working on this is a very large scale, probably at least 6 feet across painting. There are many others like it. There were large images of the world flying by me. And while everyone experiences grief differently, one who has might relate to the idea how the way we conceive of and consider time and how it feels can completely shift after that kind of a loss. And Sometimes it feels like the world stops for you and you feel everything else moving around you. Sometimes time can feel suddenly spatial and expansive. And while we're aware of this malleability of time, we're also kind of aware of the dominant kind of nature of time as being relentlessly pushing forward and ultimately irreversible. So these were some of the things that I was thinking about as I was making these paintings. And ultimately I made these paintings just because I needed to, and I really couldn't paint anything else. And these paintings accompanied me through a time when I really needed them. And so there I was making these paintings, thinking I had a reason to be making them, think I understood that reason. And then as I am a viewer of these works, one day I was working on this painting in particular and very diligently describing each and every brushstroke, each of which was supposed to kind of work together to describe this overall sense of passage. And human error stepped in, and I fudged in this little area. You can see the purple area on the bottom left. Just quickly, I was tired. I didn't feel like finish it, and it so carefully, and I left. And I walked back into the studio whenever I came back next, and that mark stopped me in my tracks and confounded me a bit. It felt like in the context of the painting, it was completely misbehaving and refusing to comply with the rest. And I found it kind of funny and intriguing. And I also, I found myself asking the question, if every other brushstroke of paint here is describing that specific velocity and that specific sense of time and space, what is the time and space that this piece of paint, this area of paint is occupying? Suddenly I realized that, oh, well, paint can also be this space for invention, or a space of escape, or a space of memory. It could be lots of different things. And so it just, something opened up for me. And I slowly started to allow these what felt like defiant or misbehaving marks to kind of whirl in, and started to speak more towards the more complex way that I experience time, both as dominant, but also as erratic and odd and strange, and our intuitive sense of time. It described that much better. And I think that I also, at this time, started to think about painting and the position that painting occupied in my life as that it kind of was this sidecar or something. It existed alongside my life. And I started to think that painting was able to reference what happened in life. And at the same time, it was not bound by the laws of nature that we are. And it existed rather in this liminal or other space. And that allowed me to kind of have this dual sense of footing. So that was a very liberating space to be in for some time. So what you'll see is that over time, I began to let these marks really envelop the works. And at some points, the reference to reality as we know it, or mortality, or our fragility, are completely enveloped by this more buoyant or jubilant brushwork in different ways. But then I also started to realize that some of these pieces of paint, which felt in liberation, also started to sit alongside other pieces of painting that started to grip or hold, or they seemed to desire some tangibility in this world of flux. And always the underbelly of this work was that it came about through an awareness of passage, an acknowledgement of passage as our condition. So the fullness oftentimes would give way to the void. And, I was very aware that in this area of painting that I was really interested in, I was interested in these spaces basically that could assemble themselves together, but they could just as easily disassemble. And they were images of precarity. And I like, the root of precarity means to be at prayer, which is not something that I find myself necessarily doing in the conventional sense, but in the studio and when I'm painting, I feel that I'm kind of getting into touch with kind of what it feels like to be human and exist in a larger sense. So that kind of defined that era of work and how those brushwork came to define the way that I had a relationship with both time and painting. At this time, I was also really infatuated with the writing of Virginia Woolf. I love Virginia Woolf for her mastery of movement and for like her amazing construction of complexity. Brilliant mind. But you might also know that Virginia Woolf ultimately ended her life by filling her pockets with stones and walking into a river. I made a number of paintings similar to the one you see here as homages of sorts to Virginia Woolf. I started making these paintings at first. I was on a residency in upstate New York and I was hiking and I saw on the path, it wasn't on the top of the hill, but it was just as a marker on the path. These are called cairns. And it struck me at that time, what if Virginia Woolf, rather than filling her pockets with stones, rather would have stacked them up as a marker on the path, turned her heels, and shifted directions. And so I made these paintings that it didn't exist, but could kind of exist in this space of painting simply because I could. And I wanted the stones to feel, rather than weighted as they were, but to feel weightless. And I made a lot of these paintings and I was trying to kind of figure them out. And while I made them, they had a lot to kind of say back to me. And I started to view them as portraits of interdependence. They only existed because of the way that each and every stone was a part of this unstable, preciously balanced stack. And that was something that reminded me of when I was in college and in an a cappella group, and we would stand in this circle and we would sing this chord and each lend our individual voices and then feel the harmony click. And when we would be singing, it felt like it was electric because we were all engaged, we were all activated, and then we created this thing that was larger than ourselves. And it also felt like if anyone took a breath or stopped singing, it could easily fall apart. And that seemed like this really precious thing. Anyway, this painting also is one that is worth mentioning because as it was meant to convey this shift in direction for Virginia Woolf, it also happened at a time where I had a dramatic shift in direction of my own life. And my husband and I left Brooklyn and we moved to Nashville. I married a musician. And we moved to Nashville. We also had a child. So we had a number of really big changes. And as we started this new family in Nashville, suddenly I had a completely different sense of what it meant to be part of an interdependent unit. And it didn't look like this. So when I first moved to Nashville, I started to play with these explorations of what it felt to be as a part of a family, as a part of this interdependent unit. So these paintings are marked by positive and negative space bumping up against each other. And the strokes sometimes seem to grasp or hold, but things are slippery. Space is moving forward in a way, but in different directions. These paintings felt more like it was an active and shifting balancing act that spoke more to the way that in a family it's built as a number of individuals come together with separate needs, separate desires, separate sensations, but somehow you make things work. Another thing that was going on during this time in my life is that the way that I experienced time felt markedly different. With a child, I felt a very dramatic shift in this sense of slowness, an awareness of my presence, and a heightened sense of attention. And these paintings respond to that sense of attention. They sit within their frames. Gone are the days of this like malleable paint that can go in and out of the frame and have some sense of freedom, but they're here constrained. They're with you. They're aware of being looked at. The slow drag is something that speaks to the way things felt for me at that time. There's also slower gradients. Here's an accurate picture of kind of my life in the moment. Those works. Another thing that entered my work at this time was a reference to the curtain. And I liked the way that these curtains behaved in these paintings because they both kind of created a more shallow sense of space, which made you feel really close to the paintings. They had an even stronger, exaggerated sense of frontality. But I also really kind of accepted the symbolism of a curtain, whether it be that it lifts and things turn on, as in a theater, or this painting is called In the Wings, where it's like right on the periphery of being present or not. And I also accept the symbolism of the closing of the curtain, referencing finality or end. And again, these thoughts come up juxtaposing presence versus absence. And this, by the way, in my studio was a wall drawing, like an experimentation with some paintings on top. And I should say that another kind of big shift that happened during my life at this time was that I did a lot of drawing. I, as a new mother, couldn't get to the studio in the same way that I once did. And I should say that in the beginning, I really resented that because I was used to the way that I worked. And I liked to go for hours and hours and hours on end in my studio. And when I couldn't, I would draw during nap times, draw at night. I look back and I'm so thankful because it pushed my sense of composition to a degree that I'm very thankful for. And I think the other most important thing for this time is that it allowed me to bring back in the figure, which was something that during that whole exploration of interdependence was something I was obviously thinking about, was the interaction of human interactions. And I was making these abstract paintings that people might not be able to see that. And I kept feeling dared in the studio to bring the figure in. So that first started, and it first came back through the drawings, and then slowly kind of came back with into the paintings as well. I feel like it really landed with this painting. This is called Cradle. I was happy to have been able to create this painting because this was the first after a while that was a large scale painting. And I felt like I could bring to a large scale again, this newer sense, this updated sense of the way that I felt like I was experiencing time. You'll see some of the newer vocabulary, the curtain, which here makes this figure seem like it's in a more of an interior or domestic setting. There's the slower drag marks, the slow gradients. There's also this really large hand, which started to creep into the work as these figures, I feel, really desired a sense of wanting to hold, maybe be held. And there's Cradle in the studio with her friends. And but she didn't quite belong in there. And what happened was that she was the first to create, she was the first in what became this new body of work that I showed at Zeitgeist Gallery in Nashville, called Sentinels. And the only thing that is not mine in this is this gorgeous sculpture by my friend Bodis Turner, which I will pause on and talk about in a bit. But for now, I just want to talk quickly about this show, Sentinels. There were a number of factors that really came into informing my state of mind as I created this body of work. I just had my second child. While I was pregnant, Trump was elected. So I was really feeling the weight of what it meant to bring children into that world. Right after we brought my baby home from the second baby home from the hospital, my husband and I witnessed a drive-by shooting in the neighborhood, which was very destabilizing. And my family and I were approaching the 10-year anniversary of that loss that happened in our family. And at that time, I was reconsidering what that meant now with my own family. So with all those factors, of course, I was feeling some sense of vulnerability, but simultaneously, I was feeling a lot of confidence and power in my own physicality and body. I had just had 2 children, labored, I was pregnant with them, labored, was keeping them alive somehow. And I was feeling a confidence in that. I was also feeling a sense of connectivity with other, not just mothers, but other caregivers, other parents, other guardians, and other people who I felt that I shared now in this awareness of having inherited the responsibility to care. So the paintings in Sentinels are marked by interior figures, many of which who are positioned beside windows, some of which whose form itself becomes window-like. The window connoting an exposure to, but separation from the outside world. The figures here are structures to hold the children, but they are not impermeable. And you'll notice I invited back in the brushwork that connoted passage. And I was curious to see how it would interact with these, with the newly formed ideas of how brushwork could also convey that sense of a slower sense of presence together. All of the figures in Sentinels were inspired by goddesses or goddess-esque figures, this one being Artemis. This is Durga, night waking with Durga. I was still breastfeeding overnight at the time. Renenutet, Isis. When I should actually go back to this, the one thing that I was thinking about in this is this, although they're interior figures, I did want the walls or the barriers to the outside world to feel as though they were shifting and moving, both to convey that sense of kind of exposure to the outside and the vulnerability, but also because I felt that I felt more, even though I was held within a space more than I ever had been before until lockdown. At the time, I was feeling so connected to other people despite being in an interior space. Isis, and then Kathy Kollwitz was the reference for this painting, who I think is a goddess in her own right. If you don't know her, an amazing artist who left a great legacy of what it meant to make work for people who are suffering in the world. And also just has an amazing body of work that speaks to the weight and the power of like what it feels like to be a parent. And this was actually a direct reference to her Pieta sculpture. But another work of hers that was also really important to me during the creation of Sentinels was this print of hers called The Mothers, which is this huddle of sort. And I felt like if I had a mascot for Sentinels, this print would be it. Because it felt, this is what I was kind of trying to create in my studio, was an amassing, was a huddling of these figures, of these goddesses, of these women, of these of a coven of sorts of people that I could feel empowered by. And it really did feel like when I was going into my studio at that time, I was entering like this kind of protective temple, which is really special. On the right here, this painting is called Sybil. And Sybil was another not quite goddess, but I was really interested at that time when I felt so uncertain about the future and a little bit intimidated by that uncertainty. I was looking at the images that of the Sibyls on the Sistine Chapel ceiling that Michelangelo painted, but I wanted to bring my Sybil down to earth. And it was really important in this body of work that although they were goddesses, I didn't want them to occupy just this ethereal space, but to be grounded, which is one of the reasons for my inclusion of that Nike sneaker, to really bring it into the now. And which was also, I mean, to be completely honest, was a bit of an homage to Frank Ocean, because I listened to Blonde basically the entire time I created this body of work, and that's really a masterpiece. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the sculptures that also existed alongside Sentinels. The sculpture here by the artist Kristen Jensen. When I had the exhibition Sentinels at Zeitgeist, it hung alongside a group show that I co-curated with my friend and artist Vadas Turner. And we created a show called States of Matter. This is another work on the left of the painting by the artist Ellie Krakow. And States of Matter was a show that Vadas and I put together. We were having, this is by Amy Brenner on the left. Vadas and I were having these conversations of how we had been feeling a sense of empowerment through change. She also was a recent mother. And this is a time in our culture when we were wanting to feel change and usher in a sense of change. We were feeling emboldened, empowerment by coming together of women, by the Women's March that had happened. So what we did was this week, we created this group show called States of Matter. And there was a reference to the 4 states of matter: gas, solid, liquid, plasma. And all of the works in the show had some visual reference to one of those states of matter or a commingling of those things. And by putting these things in conversation with one another, we wanted to kind of welcome this possibility for a conversation that felt alchemical, or felt like it could create a conversation that would elicit change. And this was like the extended huddle around my huddle. And that's Vadas Turner's piece in the front, which was included in the show. And I really feel like that body of work gave me the motivation. It was like setting a spell of sorts to feel myself more activated and in the world. And so the figures after Sentinels shift. They are on the move. They are external. They change. And one of the things that shifted, what you see here, and they started again, a lot of these shifts and changes happened at first in my drawings. I started to conceive of the idea of these mothers being out in the world. And the first step out was that they came out as what I conceived of as tent mothers. This is that one turned into a painting. it wasn't going to be possible, I knew, for to hold the children in this protective space forever. And I knew I needed to open up that grip of control. I wanted the figures to convey this desire to hold. And this was something like the structure of the tent was something that I kind of felt as first physically inside of myself. I knew what it was like to kind of be this structure for a child, but to know that it's a temporary structure. The children are much more open and exposed to the elements here. And I don't think that necessarily I can even say I feel all these things, but sometimes I think I almost make a painting with a set of conditions that I want to ready myself for. One of my favorite writers, Ocean Vuong, said, you know, you have to articulate the world that you want to live in. And sometimes I feel like I'm like creating these paintings that I'm trying to get ready for. So after this came my most recent body of work. Let me just skip back. What I want to do now actually is I want you guys to all go look at a video as you get ready. Let me just set this up for you. But right after this, I kind of launched into my most recent body of work, and it's called Circuities. And Circuities is kind of this wild, it happened in a wild set of circumstances in between the Nashville tornado and COVID. So I showed the work for a handful of days, and it almost was a blur amongst it all. And so I asked my friend and filmmaker who I really love, Jonathan Ratner, if he would go to the gallery and if he would make a film kind of about this. So this is going to be something that will come out soon, but it's a really nice way. He set up a little teaser for this film, and I thought before I launch into that, maybe we could all watch that video. So So I hope that gave everyone enough time to see that. And the rest of the statement for circuities that you didn't see in that reads, predictability, consistency, and the calm symbolism suggested by the circle do not suffice. Rather, I feel a swirling, churning, contrapuntal rhythm at play. These paintings remind me that there's no avoiding or protecting ourselves from the instability. We must take action from within the uncertainty. And so before I go through individual images, I should say that things that were important to this body of work, circuities, they all reference the circle in some way, but instead of conveying it as a symbol of calm or wholeness or totality, instead they welcome imperfection and change and action and shifting. They're in exterior spaces rather than interior. They embrace movement, physicality, connection, and a sense of openness, especially seen in the hands that you'll see, which are wide open and gesturing towards the skies oftentimes. You'll also see a lot of passages where you see a sense of transparency or a veiling. And what that is meant to do is to suggest a way that kind of we are enmeshed out in the world, and in a sense of empowerment with engagement, rather than standing in defiance or as a whole, but instead that in the paintings, the sense of transparency showed that when you were engaged, you could actually be transformed, and that was a type of empowerment. This painting is called Running Mama. It's one of the first paintings I made in circuities, and it has that kind of cathartic push, this desire of change, of movement. I considered this now, after I painted it, it's almost this anti-Vitruvian man. I did not have this in my consciousness when I first painted it, but after I saw it, I thought, if this, where he is the center of the universe, this, that it all exists around him. This began as a drawing as well, but this figure knows they're not the center. The center is always shifting. The center is all around us, but that we can be agents of change, and should be agents of change as things are in flux. And one of the things that was completely unplanned, as you saw from the sketch, was some of this vitality that came out through the color. And something that I discovered in retrospect was that I think I absorbed a lot of these colors actually from the garden, the purple of the eggplants, the red of the tomatoes, and you'll see kind of echoing back. We really are sponges for what we see. These purple beans in the gallery in the background, the amaranth. Some of the vitality of the richness of the colors really started to seep into the paintings. I love that little harvest basket. And so, this time when I was in my garden, this is an image of it, and you can kind of see that reference to the circular path that's at the center, the arcing of the path there. Gardening is a lot like painting, because you make a move, you're the viewer. You wait, you observe, you see how it behaves, you might make another move, but it's this dance of control or intentional sense of waiting, or intentional kind of passiveness on the part to allow things to take shape. The only thing is, with the garden, as opposed to painting, it's just incredibly generous with what it gives back. It just delivers so much in return. And so I really loved that. And I kind of felt like, in throwing myself into that chaos and being enmeshed in the world, it felt like that felt really right at the time. And I was also feeling like with the same sense of inheriting this responsibility to care, it also applied to the landscape. I began taking classes to become a Tennessee naturalist at this time. And I really wanted to kind of make reference in my paintings to the outside world. This painting is called Gloaming, and it's bringing back in some of that naturalistic imagery that I hadn't used in some time. I wanted, when I was thinking about my relationship with the circle and this sense of change, it didn't always feel like forward momentum. There also felt like sometimes there was this sense of mourning or loss or processing of what was being lost, thinking about the threats of climate change. And there's often this lighting quality in some of these paintings that suggests twilight or things eclipsing. Or this suspicion that things were churning or changing, which is a very odd that I made this painting, because now I know that I pulled this painting out of a studio that was hit by the tornado, but more on that later. There's a kid for scale, so you can see how large that painting is in the studio. But again, despite this sense of things shifting, I felt that I needed to practice this sense of embracing the uncertainty, embracing the lack of permanence. And I allowed these paintings to kind of thrive in that mode of uncertainty and to kind of feel transformed and empowered by it. In this one, I love that even the little child is practicing her possibly nature of being able to be open. The other thing I wanted to say is that the figures in these become more abstracted. And I wanted that to be the case because I want to get away from the idea that of like a certain feminine depiction of the maternal. I want to make these more problematic. I want to make these figures to be surrogates for all different types of people. And then the larger figure's attention is also now not always on the child, but goes elsewhere as well. In this one, she's reading, there's the little child's hand, but in this one, she's reading Wild Geese by Mary Oliver, who's someone who gives such a great example of being able to throw yourself into nature. And this painting is called Nights in the Swale, which takes a line from a painting of Mary Oliver's called Blossom, which I think you should all read. This is another Tent Mother painting that was included in Circuities called Outpost. And she's kind of poised and ready to be on the move. This painting is called The Conjurer. This again has this figure and sort of crouched, and it's abstracted, it's grounded. And this position was something that also, again, I've kind of brought from my own like kind of physical understanding of what it meant to, what I actually felt myself embodying in the garden oftentimes, in this sense of transformation and through connection. And I like the way that these figures could completely shift using the mode of transparency. I use the same positioning of the figure for this painting called The Gardener as well. This one always makes me laugh. I should also say that one of the elements in Circuities that I haven't mentioned yet is that alongside the paintings, I was starting seeds. I was aware that this show was happening during March and April, which is a perfect time to start seeds. And the plan was that we would release all of the seedlings that were in the show to the public at the end of the show. There it is again. That painting on the right, this is called Coven. And it's one of the paintings, one of the last paintings that I created in the show. And it's one of the only paintings that has multiple figures, which was something that was really important for me because I didn't want all of the paintings to kind of celebrate this sense of individualism. I wanted to embrace a sense of plurality. Circuities was given that title because all of the paintings are kind of inspired by ulterior or less direct modes of kind of empowerment, because I think that these are things that we need to seek out: alternative paths to power, alternative paths to truth, alternative paths to our pursuit of joy or pleasure, and alternative ways of being in the world. In this painting, this makes a direct reference to this manifesto that's in her hands. Oh, you also see that this is a studio shot. You can see I was painting these seeds into this painting as well. They're thinking about starting seeds too. But this manifesto refers to a 1969 manifesto by the artist Merrill Laderman Euclides, who's someone I was thinking about so much while I was creating this body of work. And Merrill Laderman Euclides is an artist who also became a mother. And when she became a mother, she felt her time being constantly occupied through maintenance work, cleaning, scrubbing, washing dishes, doing laundry, taking care of things. And she didn't want that to eclipse who she was as an artist. And so instead, she made a manifesto and said that maintenance art is a form of art. And in this form of art, or in this manifesto, she lies out two instincts. One instinct is the life instinct, and the other is the death instinct. There's two kind of ways of pursuing art in the world. And the life instinct is the death instinct I'll start with is defined by separation, individuality, the avant-garde instinct to create individual works, original works, and a drive for change. Whereas the life instinct is defined by unification, what she calls the eternal return, the perpetuation of the species, and working to maintain the state of equilibrium. Of course, I also, as a mother, can really relate to this sense of how important it is to maintain, and how that work is oftentimes invisible. So she proposed to do these tasks in a museum herself. She also made a lot of the maintenance workers visible. Anyway, I encourage everyone to look into her work because it's very inspiring. But me kind of including the seed starting project as a part of this show felt like it was a way that I could lean into the life instinct, because often I find myself compelled to make these large, big paintings, which would be defined as the death instinct. But these seeds allowed me to, and when I'm working in the garden, it feels like I'm helping to maintain a larger ecosystem than just outside of myself. Of course, I had to bring the seeds home because COVID hit, but I did successfully keep them alive, organized them, and distributed them across Nashville, and had some safely socially distanced picked up as well. So that's on one end of circuities, in which what I haven't talked about yet was also that there was the tornado, which you mentioned already in the introduction. But the tornado, which happened the night before I brought the works out of the studio, or out of my studio into the gallery, destroyed my studio space, which was not just mine, but was a skate shop and was shared by 5 other artists. But we were very lucky, and many people in Nashville were not lucky. Lives were forever changed, and it destroyed neighborhoods. And so when we had the opening of the show only days after the tornado, it only made sense that we use the space of an art gallery, which is basically, but where people were coming together to draw some attention, to see what we could do. And so with the help of so many other artists, so many artists came together. I asked them to donate works, and we had a fundraiser. Like Michael said, it was very successful. I have to say, I felt incredibly emboldened by the care of the community, and I felt incredibly emboldened by the way that people come together in these times. Because like we know, this has been a difficult time for all of us. And somehow I pulled this show off for a handful of days. And I feel proud of it. And I'm still kind of in awe that it existed for the maybe 6 days of space that it did. Anyway, I think, Michael, I've gone a bit over time now, so I think we can maybe stop here and take questions.
Yeah, this is great. I think I'm trying to get my video popped back on here. We're gonna take some Q&A, and let's see here. There's a couple formal questions that have come through on the Q&A. One is, how free are you while you're painting? And literally it says, what I mean to say, do you try to stick closely to your original inspiration, or you kind of follow what you feel as the painting progresses?
This has shifted for me over time. Earlier on, everything was free. Like I would only have I'll plan out A, B, and C, but the rest of the alphabet can completely, it'll just happen. After I had children, I just didn't really have I couldn't even be in the studio for long enough for periods of enough open reflection for that to be a possibility. And so I needed to kind of pack in a little bit more work in the prep. So the drawings. And so, of course, what I'll do now is sometimes in the drawings, I'll do lots of different drawings. I'll trace on top of the drawing. So I've had to bring some of that process, because I like when things are shifting and changing, but I've had to kind of do that more on the drawing end. Of course, there are moments where sometimes I will just have an impulse idea in the studio and I'll start something without a plan. But generally, just with the nature of how I have to occupy my time in the studio now, there's a little more prep that goes into it.
Right. Well, during the prep time then, so you mentioned that you also have taught, and you're an artist and a teacher. And so how do you compartmentalize the artist part with the teaching part, especially when you're doing your drawings, or what makes the cut? Are you critiquing as you go along? Are you kind of putting the critique person off to the side and just painting and looking at it later? How does that work for you? How do you make it work? Or can you make it work?
So is the question, how do I compartmentalize being an artist and the other aspects, or how do I yeah?
Or do you compartmentalize? Or is it possible for you to, or you struggle with that idea? Do you critique as you go along? Or
how do I critique my ideas, or
the painting itself, the actual formal, the formal qualities of the painting itself as you're moving along?
Well, one thing I'll say is as I have all of these other things that I have to do in my life that take me away from painting, I could simply resent those things. But one of the ways I've tried to conceive of them is they're kind of these built-in modes of kind of blockades in my life that force me to wait and assess and to see if something really is a good idea or not. Does that stay with me? If I have total freedom to go in, I might have lots of ideas that aren't that great. But sometimes I'll have something, I'll be out in the garden with my kids or something, and they'll sit, okay, let me just linger on that for a little while. And if it stays, I know I should keep paying attention to that. So sometimes I think that's actually really helped me, because certain things, they start to grow, and then I start to understand them more, and then they compel me, and then I need to get them on paper, and then I need to think about them.
Right.
That makes sense.
So this one coming for the Q&A. How do you go about painting your pain, and where do you start? Earlier work.
So I don't think of it as painting. I don't think of it as painting the pain. I think of it as describing some of the conditions that allow for that tension that can provide that sense of pain. Something that I've also found that is really helpful for me is to not always see that pain, but that paint allows me to see other possibilities that exist alongside that. You'll notice that there's a lot of lightness that happens in my work. And I think that people, before they hear me talk about it, might see that it's only light and colorful and vibrant. But as you hear me talk, you know kind of where it comes from. So I use those two things to balance each other. And I use the paintings to kind of pull me outside of that sometimes too. So
I know you've been with this latest body of work incorporating more of the garden sense and that directly into your work as far as the color scheme and line quality and stuff. This came in from the Q&A. What's your next body of work focused on or concerned with or limited by? Are you going to, so I'm thinking like my question to add on to that, are you going to expand this garden route?
What I've been thinking about a lot recently, inspired probably by 2020 and like all of the maintenance work that I've been occupied in at home, which have been made it a lot harder for me to get into the studio. And I've felt that, I've had to kind of wait to paint and wait to be creative. And one of the things I've really been taking inspiration from in the garden is the idea of dormancy, which is a state that a seed goes through when things are waiting for things to change. And I'm not necessarily as interested in dormancy as a state of rest, but I'm interested in dormancy as a state of potential. Because anyone who gardens and you know that there's this little inert tiny seed, and then you see this amazing transformation that occurs. I mean, that is so hopeful and invigorating. And that is something that I kind of cling to. So I've been thinking about like this state of dormancy that, what you wait for ultimately is all you need is the right conditions. So I've been thinking a lot about dormancy. So I think that that's staying with me recently.
Right. Yeah, because we kind of talked about this the other day when we were chatting, and you mentioned dormancy, and I've been thinking about that, and I've been thinking of like even as me as an artist, I'm thinking less like my practice now is less as a seed and more of a 7-year locust that sits in the ground and ponders. Then comes out, makes a bunch of noise, and then hides for 7 years. So,
oh yeah, but
I love this idea of dormancy.
Phenomenal.
Right. So this is sticking with the garden. What's your favorite plant and why?
I've been really interested in like learning a little bit more about native plants recently, just because, to think now that I'm in Tennessee, and I'm not from Tennessee, I didn't grow up here. So I've been trying to learn much more about the, native landscape, and the ecosystem here. But one of my favorite, it's a native plant. It's false indigo. It's called Baptisia, and it's in a lot of like prairie planting. It's a beautiful plant. I think that's really not a great answer. I haven't thought, but currently I have something that's coming back in my garden now, and I have some seeds started in the other room for some Baptisia. So I might share that with whoever asked the question if they work out.
I think you will. This is going back to another formal question, and I have a very similar question that you might tap on with this one. So, do you have certain colors that you notice yourself using more than others? And if so, what about these colors draw you in as it relates to your work?
Oh yeah, I mean, in Sentinels, I was using like this hot pink and this phthalo green that were completely like they're unnatural colors, and I use them intentionally. Like I said, I want to sometimes the paintings to be in that liminal other space, and so intentionally sometimes when I use those artificial colors, it kind of can pull me out of my world and have this sense of otherness as a position in my life. But in the more recent work, circuities, a lot of the color has shifted, and it has become more like it comes from the earth. There's a lot of there's Indian red and some ochres, and I'm more inspired by kind of the things that feel a little more terrestrial. And yeah, I think that for a while I felt like I needed color to pull myself out, and now I'm starting to see if I can come back down to earth a little bit with the color.
Yeah. Do you have any interest in making your own colors from your garden, like actually grinding petals and flowers?
I do. Yeah, I have a friend who's doing the work now, who I'm wanting to learn from, and I also have a book that I just bought. So I'm hoping I'm starting some indigo in the other room, as well as some weld, and as well as some madder, which are all plants that are great for dyeing. So yeah, I really want to do that. It's an investment. Sometimes you have to grow something and it's only in the third year that you're able to use the plant for those purposes, but I'm trying.
My next question on that would be like, will you continue to paint as large? Will you produce enough product to make your paint to continue painting large if you stick with that route?
I mean, these are one of the things that I think about all the time. Like, I cannot continue to make these huge, large paintings. Also, I'm like, this is the death instinct, like, gone crazy, these large paintings. And I have to think about, you know, resources and waste. I think about all these things, but I'm so compelled when I make them, and they have so much they bring so much meaning to my life when I'm able to make them. But yeah, these are questions I think about all the time. I think that probably I'll have to bring first in maybe just some inks and do some drawings is where I think I'll have to go to first.
Right. I ran across it. I pulled this up, and I have it on my screen, so I'll read it. I came across this, and I was thinking about your work and then our conversation the other day about gardening and artwork, and this like gardening as a practice that influences the artwork, but also gardening as a metaphor for an art practice. And I just want to get your thoughts on this one. It says, "You are not a machine. You're more like a garden. You need different things on different days. A little sun today, a little less water tomorrow. You have fallow and fruitful seasons, and it's not a design flaw. It is wiser than perpetual sameness. So what does your garden need today?"
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. I mean, it's basically like a garden is this practice. It's a constant failure, constant experimentation. You know, things find their ways. You have to learn from it. You know, you're thrown into this world of uncertainty, and things responding. I mean, that's like, there's so many similarities to me in gardening and painting. And some of that is just like this practicing of like what it means to engage in something that's temporal and that's uncertain, which is essentially so much more of what life is about, and what we contend with as being mortal and have the capacity of consciousness and the ability to love, and these things that are shifting, you know. So
Right.
when you throw yourself into a garden, it feels much more like you're almost getting used to those conditions and forced into adaptation. Like, oh, the plant doesn't like it here, but the plant likes it over there, you know.
Right. Yeah, because I think we talked about like microclimates, and
Yes.
yeah, I've discovered maybe 10 different microclimates in my yard, and I just can't seem to get it right sometimes. And then stuff grows, and I just don't know. But I've taught myself a lot about soil acidity. I'm really into
Yeah.
soil. And so, yeah, it's gardening has been my way to like kind of step out away from art, even though it's a similar practice. It's just not thinking about it, but how it ultimately influences it anyway. So,
It just feels like I like it. I like gardening sometimes for the same reasons I like art. And it feels like the knowledge is limitless.
mhm,
You know, like you start learning with art, you're just like, oh, and then that other artist did this thing, which can be an inspiration. This other artist, and with planting, you know, there's just so many things you can learn, and how
yeah,
things interact. And I mean, that's just, I'm so attracted to those spaces of like, oh, you can just dive in, you know.
right. It's a perpetual rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even for the students that are watching, right? The more you study art, the more you know, the more you realize that you don't know.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you realize that this is a tip of an iceberg is not even a description. You know, even after 30 years of studying art, I'm still baffled by like the insane amount of information that I don't know. So why am I getting into gardening? Another avenue of things I don't know.
But
But
I mean, what we also talked about the other day, it was like the thing that's amazing about gardening is that, like, I'm like, oh, I make a painting. I'm like, does anyone really care about this painting? You know, but then you make in a garden, and like the kids are running through it and they're picking flowers, and then the birds are coming in, and the bees and the butterflies. And it feels like you create this thing that's for so much more than just
mhm,
yourself. And it's immediate. You know, you don't just see it at an opening or something. You know, you see
right.
it every day.
Right. And our garden is actually on our neighbor's property. So we've actually gotten closer with our neighbors
Oh,
because
okay.
we're using their land, but we're also giving them food and they're watching and
Yeah.
it's been great. So this is we probably have one time for one more question. This is kind of going back to some of our art teacher advice. So what advice would you give to an emerging and learning artist as it relates to discovering your favorite medium and trusting in the learning process and your failures?
Okay. I would say, like, try it all. I think that it's important. I think it's important to just, especially when you're still young, to not limit yourself in the way. I felt like whenever I was maybe a young art student, I would sometimes get caught up in the idea of, I don't know if I want to be that kind of artist. Maybe I should try this, or maybe I should be this, or do I really want to be a feminist artist? Or, I wasn't sure, not just mediums, but subject matter. Uh, and now looking back, I thought, you learn by doing. You throw yourself in there and you try different things, and you see how different mediums talk back to you. And so, I think it's important. Of course, one of the things I ask myself actually is when you have an idea, we have some subject in your mind that you're interested in exploring in art. Are there qualities that are intrinsic to an art form? For painting, for example, if you took painting and you thought, is there something particular about painting that can talk back to this condition? And it can be something that's about painting, like painting's flatness, or painting's sense of being framed, or painting's sense of you see it all at once, or the way that starts as a medium that is first wet and then dries. But you think about these qualities that are integral and intrinsic to painting, and can that say something about your subject? And sometimes that can help lead you toward a medium that might do service to those ideas.
Wow, such a great answer. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your work. Congratulations again for being one of the Tennessee Artist Fellows, the CECA Tennessee Artist Fellows for this year. Thank you for everyone for joining. I'm going to put a couple little things in the chat there. That is the New Gallery, Department of Art and Design, and CECA's Facebook and Instagram handles, so follow us there. Thank you again, Karen, so much for sharing your work. And I'm definitely I got my first shot of the vaccine today. So hopefully in another few weeks, I'll be vaccinated this summer. And next month, I'm coming down to visit the garden and we're just going to walk around in circles.
Please do. Please do. Thank you again for having me. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Good night.